we are just slightly past the halfway point of February, the second month of the year in question being 2022, and already we've dedicated a lot of time on the Metal Meltdown to modern death metal. We've reviewed new music from Venom Prison, Shadow of Intent, Fit for an Autopsy, Party Cannon. We're getting ready to review more new music from the likes of Mass Worship, Blood Incantation, Undeath, and many more. We've also talked about modern death metal as a result of ongoing controversies surrounding Chris Barnes. But for some of y'all, this stuff just ain't good enough. Not so much because it's, objectively terrible, but simply because it's not classic death metal. Some of y'all have even gone as far as to bitch and moan in the comment section, well, what about X-Band? What about Y-Band? We can't talk about Z-Band without first talking about X and Y-Band. If it wasn't for X and Y-Band, there would be no Z-Band. If there was no X and Y-Band, there'd be no music. There'd be no noise. There'd be no anything. Why aren't we talking about X and Y-Band? But hey, as whiny as you are, you're not objectively incorrect, and I do think it's about time that we talked about some more classic death metal on the Metal Meltdown. So today we're talking about a brand new studio album from New York death metal veterans Immolation, who over the course of the past 30 years, holy shit, have been putting out some seriously soul-crushing material. That 90s output in particular, like those first 4 albums, holy shit, wicked hot. Fucking love it. And though they may not be held in the same regard as a band like, say, Cannibal Corpse or the Black Dahlia Murder, very similarly to Cannibal Corpse and the Black Dahlia Murder, Immolation have remained pretty fucking consistent. There's maybe just a brief dip in quality with Unholy Cult, but everything else that comes after is pretty fucking solid. Some of their more recent records like Kingdom of Conspiracy and Atonement, I would argue, are fucking fantastic. And this officially brings us to Acts of God, the band's 11th studio album overall. I'm gonna cut straight to the fucking point here. It's decent. It's not mind-blowing, it's not revolutionary, it's definitely not on the same level as some of the classic records. I don't even think it's as strong as something like the aforementioned Kingdom of Conspiracy or Atonement, but it is, in its own regard and its own right, a pretty solid offering that will absolutely deliver those crushing classic death metal tones and riffs if that is exactly what you are looking for. As per the norm with Immolation, the album is very grim, very dark, apocalyptic. In size and scale, the sound is dense and very thick. The guitars are slimy, groovy, soul-crushingly heavy and brutal. The percussion roars like cannon fire and cracks like thunder. There are some parts of this record that are a little bit more technical than other parts of the record, and there are some almost black and death metal kind of riffs and a couple melodic guitar licks here and there, but really nothing outside the norm of what I would expect from an extreme metal band in 2022. This is ultimately, despite whatever flourishes you might think are here, an Immolation album through and through. Immolation insist that this is one of their darkest albums ever, and in a literal sense, I think that they are correct, seeing as how most of the album is literally about darkness. The Age of No Light, Shed the Light, Let the Darkness In. It's fair to say that darkness, the absence of light, being dark, is a pretty constant theme on this record. But yeah, like I said before, it's an Immolation album through and through. It's everything you could want and expect from an Immolation album, which by default makes Acts of God somewhat predictable. That's a fair argument, but honestly, these guys are good enough of musicians and songwriters that it's not a big problem. Yes, they're serving up meat and potatoes again, but it's not just microwaved meatloaf and a baked potato. It's steak and fries. It's a Canadian strip loin steak with hand-cut fries and chimichurri. It's pretty fucking good. It's pretty fucking spicy. Very well seasoned. You've got an Act of God, for instance, which starts this album off on an appropriately gnarly note with some pummeling grooves and blast beats and super chaotic and exciting death metal guitar wizardry. There's a little bit of a blackened underbelly to this, some spices and flavors that would not be out of place on like an early 2000s Behemoth cut, but this is, it's still Immolation doing what they do. It's not too left field or too crazy or too heavy or different. Similarly, a track like Noose of Thorns just bleeds pure evil and hatred with some slower, more monotonous grooves and a really strong chorus. It does spend maybe a little bit too much time building up so much momentum and anticipation and atmosphere, but it's all worth it in the end. It's one of the strongest, one of the heaviest cuts on the entire record, in my opinion. I'm also really liking some of the more complex and obtuse grooves and arrangements found in tracks like When Halos Burn and Apostle. There's a little bit of a Gorguts kind of ferocity and technicality to this that I really appreciate, combined with those classic Immolation death metal flavors that we know and love. Immoral Stain is a pretty gruesome little creature too. I love how this thing just kind of crawls and lurches at you like some kind of disfigured creature. It's a genuinely disgusting number. Honestly, I don't think there's a single weak or even mediocre cut on the entire album. Nothing I would go as far as to call filler, but that being said, there is a lot of fat that needs to be trimmed away. With 15 tracks clocking in at 53 minutes in total, it just feels too long. And unfortunately, the songwriting and the production is so one-dimensional by design that at a certain point, everything just bleeds together. Granted, it's still pretty brutal, like I'm still bobbing my head and I'm still ready to punch a motherfucker out if I'm given the opportunity, but I'm definitely not as invested in this album near the middle of it as I was at perhaps the beginning of it. It doesn't help either that Ross Dolan is not an especially versatile or dynamic singer. I mean, what he does is perfectly fine for death metal, but it does ultimately amount to a very straightforward kind of Cookie Monster death metal guttural. Like, I'm not gonna go out of my way to ask Dolan to change because I don't think he will, but I can't help but wonder how much more impactful this material would be if there was a singer with a little bit more range delivering all of this. I'm gonna give this a semi-enthusiastic 3 out of 5. It's by no means the best thing that Immolation have ever made. It's not one of the best albums of the year either, but it is fun, it is heavy, it is brutal, it gives you everything that I think you would want from an Immolation album, from a classic death metal album. It's well produced, it's well performed, it's not perfect, but it's still pretty fucking tasty. If for whatever reason you just like totally despise Immolation, I can't imagine there's any moment of this album that would change your mind. But if you're like a total death metal veteran, a hardcore fan, the type of dude who's just like, modern death metal sucks, bro, you're probably gonna love this album. And more fucking power to you, honestly. I really do not have much more to say at this point. I mean, it's Immolation. I probably could have just said that at the very beginning and that would have sufficed. 3 to 5, it's pretty decent. I had some fun. Check it out. Why not? You got nothing better to do today. If you did, you wouldn't be here. And that is it for the Metal Meltdown. I'm not an expert, nor do I claim to be, so what do you think? Do you like this record? Do you not like this record? And what do you want to hear from me next? Thank you for watching. Make sure you press subscribe right here so you get updates on the Metal Meltdown immediately. And as always, you have yourself a fantastic fucking day.